So thank you all so much for being here today. And for those of you who will come and visit later on YouTube, today I want to take a dive into the astrology of what's happening as we approach this election in November. The next 60 days are going to be quite telling. And I think we're moving through a very, very critical point in American history. Um, I think we're all quite aware of the pressures that are on us, both personally and nationally, collectively. And we're gonna kind of dive into the shadow because we really aren't going to understand what's happening in our country until we really look at the shadow of things and a little bit of perhaps the history and the heritage that we have brought forward. So I hope you all enjoy this and just fasten your seatbelts. So since 2008, when Pluto entered the sign of Capricorn, the world as we know it has changed. From 2012 to 2015, Uranus and Pluto squared 7 times. Then in 2016 and 2017, Uranus conjoined Eris 3 times. This year, 2020, the conjunctions of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto are being rocked 5 times by squares to Eris, most significantly from Pluto, events that will persist through the end of 2021. Pluto and Eris meeting up in their current signs of Capricorn and Aries is a remarkably rare occurrence. It has not been witnessed for 2,700 years. Throughout this litany of astrological events in the United States, we have suffered the election of Donald Trump, the dismantling of environmental sanctions, the reemergence of centuries-old cultural, racial, and ethnic xenophobia, and now a pandemic of cataclysmic proportions with collateral damage that threatens our lives and our freedom. In my humble opinion, the well-publicized US Pluto return is already active. We are currently witnessing this astrological event for the first time since the American Revolution. Perhaps less publicized is the US Neptune opposition. The last time this event occurred was during the years just prior to the Civil War. Waiting in the wings is the US Uranus return, which will unfold over the late 2020s. Where do we begin to unravel what is happening around us and within us in order to gain understanding, regain our balance, if not our normalcy? All of these outer planet heavies are currently making significant aspects to the US chart that reflect what is happening to our country as a whole and to its people. In the chart I'm going to show you today, there are a remarkable 51 partile, exact same degree aspects to the election chart. These are events that relate to the White House, Congress, the Supreme Court, the US Post Office, and our current human state of agitation, distress, and sense of loss. In order to be able to process all of this, we need to be grounded in the understanding that we are living through evolutionary times. A great leap is occurring, what the Hopis call the emergence of the fifth world. Where do we begin to unravel what is happening around us in order to regain our balance, if not our normalcy? In the time I have today, I would like to discuss the birth chart of the United States and the current transits to it, and how these planetary influences are reflecting the issues, the crises, and the current threats to our way of life. It's a birth chart that you might not be familiar with, one erected for July 6, 1775. Regardless of the birth chart that you use for the birth point of the United States, the outer planet transits remain within a degree or two. Only the timing changes. So let's begin to unpack the astrology of this Mishigas. Late in the morning of July 6, 1775, the Second Continental Congress passed acts to quote, bear arms against Great Britain and to establish a standing army. The next day, they named George Washington as commander-in-chief. Those legislative acts by default severed all economic and political connections to our mother country. Prior to this date, the naval embargo and the skirmishes with the British redcoats at Lexington and Concord had been defensive actions. Now the colonies adopted an offensive military stance. As of this date in history, the 13 American colonies were no longer colonies of Great Britain. They became a sovereign independent state. I came to this chart by the way of my friend Ariel Gutman, who collaborated for a time with the late Jim Lewis, the realizer of astrocartography. Ariel told me that Jim believed that this chart was the true chart of the United States. I have been working with this chart for the last year or so and with some surprisingly accurate results, especially current events. As I said, there are remarkable 51 partile aspects to the US chart for the US election. And here I have the actual excerpt from the Journals of the Continental Congress from those days. In our own native land, in defense of the freedom that is our birthright, and which we will ever enjoyed until the late violation of it, for the protection of our property, acquired solely by the honest industry of our forefathers and ourselves, against violence actually offered, we have taken up arms. So these are all the partile aspects in the synastry of the two charts. We're certainly not going to have time to go through all of these, but I just wanted to show them to you so that you see that the impact that this election is going to have on the country's birth chart that we're going to explore today. The United States was founded by settlers who were primarily from Europe. They came from different countries, bringing with them not only different cultural heritage and customs, but also a different worldview. And it's important to remember that for the first 170 years, the 13 American colonies were British, living according to British law and British tradition. There were also Dutch and Spanish tradition, as well as French, Italian, Portuguese, and African. And they were not all Christian either. In 1492, the Jews were expelled from Spain. Columbus's ships sailed from Spain. So in keeping with Jeffrey Wolf Green's paradigm of evolutionary astrology, in order to understand this birth chart, we have to understand the conditioning from which it arose and what is behind it. And basically, there are three thought streams that populated the philosophies of the original settlers of North America. And I want to also say that I use the word American loosely because we are not the only Americans. We are here in the United States. We are North Americans, but we share that name also with Canada. And America also covers everybody who lives in South America. But I think it's an example of the egocentricity of this country, that of what it has become or how it has developed, that we're going to explore today. So one of the founding thought streams was Puritanism. And Puritanism said that God directs all things by exercise of his patriarchal will, that God chooses who is worthy for salvation, and that human beings, especially women, were portrayed as depraved sinners and often burned at the stake as witches. And there was an excellent Netflix video that you can watch about this group called The Family, which is probably the most important unknown faction within the American politics, which really is a direct result of this line of thinking, and has had tremendous influence, not only historically, but in our current times. Many, many presidents have engaged with this, and the national prayer meeting that happens every year that they've all attended was started by this group called The Family. The second thought stream were the conquistadors, and that's Spanish for conquerors, came from Spain. They were professional soldiers of fortune looking for gold in indigenous cultures. They used European tactics, firearms, and cavalry against spears and bows and arrows. But their victories were facilitated for the most part by the European diseases which they brought, for which the tribes had no immunity. And as a matter of fact, they created they decimated the population of North and South America in the years that they were here. They also brought with them religious missionaries who converted the indigenous tribes to their way of thinking, who disregarded any of the spiritual doctrines that were existing here in place. And there were also, as I referred to, there were non-military occupants on the Spanish galleons, French and Italians, Jews seeking refuge from the Spanish Inquisition, who, along with the soldiers and missionaries, would become the oldest inhabited settlements and family lineages in the United States. The third line of thinking was Freemasonry, and it was based on the concept of gnosis, which is defined as the knowledge of transcendence arrived at by way of interior intuitive means, where there was no need for some intermediary priests or rabbis or seers in order to ordain what was happening. It was about personal direct experience of God or source or all that is, however you frame that. And it expresses itself through the medium of symbolism and myth. The Masons built many of the important national buildings and monuments, incorporating in them traditional occult and astrological symbolism. Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and George Washington were Freemasons, but they were also slave owners. In 1775, there were 500,000 Negro slaves in America. That was 1/5 of the population. So this is the chart for July 6, 1775. The first American settlers, as I said, were exiles from the homeland. They were religious refugees seeking persecution and soldiers of fortune seeking treasure and royal recognition, ready to fight to maintain control. They had lost their own homeland, so they had no reluctance to usurp the homeland of the indigenous people of the land they so-called discovered. They transferred their wounding experience to the primitive people they encountered. And they felt driven by idealism to create a new future, a destiny ensured by divine intervention. And you'll see with each of these things, I have included the astrological references to it and how I've discerned what some of these things mean. The New World became their surrogate homeland. They brought with them memories of past trauma, persecution, and oppression. They came to meet the New World with their self-empowerment as the reigning authority. Their sense of God-given self-importance and intellectual conceit empowered them to exert their sense of superiority without moral compass. And their sense of self-importance allowed for ethnic inequality and generated a distorted sense of self-worth. So this is the bi-wheel for the election day 2020, November 3rd, 2020, and the US chart for July 5th, 1776. The US Pluto return is already in orb. You can see that Pluto is at 22 degrees today, or actually, yeah, it probably is there today. And it was at 25 degrees in 1775. And there's a T-square in this chart. It's a T-square between Eris opposite the moon, Saturn, and Pluto, Eris conjunct Mars. So authoritarianism, Saturn, applies negative pressures to the democratic process. The moon represents, the first house represents not only the people, the country at large, but the moon in this chart also represents the president. Because the moon is the ruler of the 10th house Cancer. So there's an interesting correlation already between the governance in this country and the governed, and the interplay between them. They really are sharing the same astrological influences, if you would. So authoritarianism applies the negative pressures to the democratic process. And it applies emotional pressures to the people at large and lawlessness at the highest level of government. And this is what we're experiencing. Uranus and Mars, Eris and Mars together are quite a powerful combination, aspecting both the moon and Pluto in the 7th house. The Sibley chart for the United States details that the 3 transits to the natal conjunctions of Pluto and the 3 transits to the natal oppositions of Neptune will occur in 2022, exactly 1 year later. I suggest that we all observe and decide for ourselves whether this election is a turning point in history, or if somehow an even more intense period is still to come 1 year from now. The areas where this will play out are democracy versus authoritarianism, which is the fourth house. The fourth house is about democracy. It is about the people. It's about foreign relations, the seventh house, and perhaps the interplay of allies, supposed allies, or not so much allies from our seventh house, and about the land and about real estate. And the potential issues and circumstances will be the volatility of the election and perhaps a disrupted economy. There is a threat of war with Eris conjunct Mars. There's clearly a threat of war, and domestic and or foreign terrorism or intervention. It could be some kind of nuclear event, because the mundane astrology of the fourth house is nuclear power. It's also terrorism. It's also the mafia. So there could be underworld or mafia revelations about connections to the White House and drastic, chaotic changes to the American way of life. This is the US Pluto return. This conjunction is going to perfect 3 times. The first one is not so far in the future. It's in February, which is only 4 months from now. And then it will reoccur as Pluto retrogrades in July 10th of 2021, and the Pluto will, a little tongue-tied today, Pluto will turn direct again, and on Christmas Day of 2021, will make its final pass. And we're going to clearly see a disruption of the democratic process. It's already underway. Extreme political polarity, because we're also in the middle of the Neptune opposition, which I will come to in a few minutes. Political power shift and the eruption of repressed anger. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So Neptune in this chart is the ruler of the sixth house. It's in Virgo. Neptune is in the 12th house, conjunct Mars. And there's a struggle to provide the greatest good for the people and for the country and the people. We've struggled for that for 250 years to find equality. Public actions and choices at their worst are driven by selfish interest, clandestine illegal activities, and when at their best, they're driven by spiritual or metaphysical beliefs and practices. And there's an evolutionary pressure driven by idealism and unconditional love, but there's also lawlessness and a lack of public trust. Can be a sacred commitment to the pursuit of ideals that strive to support the greater good. It works both ways, and it really depends on whether the light or the shadow of it is brought to bear. As the ruler of the sixth house, it rules public health, epidemics, and the workforce. And in mundane astrology, Neptune refers to socialism and drug problems and the well-being of the less advantaged. So the areas where this will play out are hidden agendas, spies, secret enemies, prisons. I won't comment on that. And that's a 12th house activity. The media and the post office, we're seeing, issues with the post office, and certainly the media, the fake news. You can't believe half of what you read on Facebook or Twitter, or maybe more than half. And the fourth house is the people and democracy. So it's going to play out there. Public health, the pandemic is underway. I'd like to say that maybe the pandemic's going to go away by Christmas, but I would be making that up just out of wishful thinking. And it's also about the judicial system, universities and churches, and again, we're seeing activity here in all these areas. The Supreme Court is quite important through all of this, and it remains to be seen, what role they will play. We saw what role they played in the impeachment, which really wasn't very much. The universities are all opening again, and I just read that in North Carolina there are over 1,000 reported cases of COVID, and certainly what's happening in the churches with the religious figures. So the U.S. Neptune opposition is already in place. It's only 2 degrees out of orb, applying. It's retrograde at the moment, but it has been at 20. It's moving backwards now. These are cataclysmic polarity of beliefs. Never in our history, perhaps maybe at the Civil War, did we have anywhere near the polarization of beliefs that we have. And even during that time, I don't think that it was quite as intense. It was not the razor's edge that it is now. It's really unfathomable, how severe it's gotten. Some people are waiting for a savior, very Neptunian. Others are feeling to be martyrs, and others are saving themselves one way or another. Emotional conflict and an extreme clash of belief systems, as I said, and egos and personal expression are stretched to the limit by what they believe. Belief in divine judgment and retribution. And there, skip steps are in play here as well, because Neptune is squaring the nodes. I'll come to that, I think, in another screen. So that means that all these Neptunian things are bouncing back and forth between idealism and the savior martyr complex. So as I said, extreme clash, polarization of conflicting belief systems, outrage, voices raised in angry protests. People are really angry on both sides of the fence. There's almost nobody who is neutral at this point. Crises, reconciling the past with the current necessities going forward. Well, this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with 250 years of history, and we're recognizing that it has not worked. That there are just things that are in place and part of our culture that really need to change. And needing to ground and reimagine our current beliefs into working models that create a better future for everyone. And these are the 3 dates of the Neptune opposition. We already had one back in May, a second one in August. We'll have the last one in March. And clearly, we're moving through this time. I mean, if anybody can remember a time in history when beliefs were more polarized than now, I'd like to hear about it. And I can't imagine it getting any worse than it is. So we have to look at the sun, because the sun rules the 10th house. The 10th house is not only in mundane astrology, the ruler, the governor, king, president, whoever is the head of the government, but the sun is also placed in the 10th house. So we have a doubling up of this sun 10th house paradigm. And to boot, the sun is the ruler of the lunar north node. The sun on the midheaven is all about status and reputation, being driven towards advancement. The United States always sees itself as a world leader and has become a world leader. And it's about family values, Cancer, and safety and security. But it's also about nationalism. My country is better than your country, and jingoism. I'd like to think, we see all of these comparisons of the United States and Europe and Asia. And, I think America really comes up at the bottom of the heap in terms of the, how proud we are of ourselves on the world stage. For many years, I traveled overseas on business, and so I was often so embarrassed by Americans, traveling overseas. They behaved in ways that they wouldn't have behaved in their own hometown. It's also isolationism. The sun here, though it's making all these aspects, it's only making a single aspect to an inner planet, to the moon. The rest of these aspects, and to Mars, and it's a quintile. It's basically orphaned from its connection to the rest of the chart, which suggests a sense of isolationism and also a very fragile nature. The presidency has always been fragile. I don't think that in any other country there have been as many assassinations of kings and attempts of assassinations and people who could have been president who have just been, killed. There's a fragile nature, almost as if there's a shadow over the White House for many years. We have been the visible role model for self-actuating governance, but we've also been the wounder, projecting our wounds onto others. And there's a crisis resulting from the persistence of this patriarchal expression. And we have inner resources, but are they being heard? Are they being ignored? That's Pallas Athena. So the biwheel for the looking at the sun to the U.S. chart, it is the ruler of the 11th house, and that refers to Congress and foreign allies in mundane astrology. And the sun is, as I said, is the president. So we have all those things wrapped up into one bundle here. Areas where this will play out will be the financial markets, because the sun is transiting the second house. Public health and pandemics, because we have Neptune in the second house, and Neptune is a double whammy there, because Neptune itself also refers to pandemics and public health. The foreign allies, the seventh house, and the presidency, the 10th house. So needless to say, there's a lot of attention that will be on this election, with the sun trining the sun. And we can expect subterfuge, underhanded tactics, and illegality by the president. We're already seeing it. He's messing with the post office. He told everybody to vote twice. I mean, the whole thing is, it's so obvious, but it's only obvious to those who see it. Police or military activity relating to the election, foreign intervention, very, very possible with Mars retrograde, separating from a last quarter square to the sun, and crises caused by deception, confusion, hidden agendas, or the pandemic itself. As I said, Neptune and Pisces by transit, also in a last quarter trine to the US sun. And we like to think of trines as somehow good, but trines are not good or bad. They just facilitate. They just open up an easy channel for the two archetypes to work together. So, with Neptune working with the sun, I mean, it could easily become lawlessness and deception and confusion and hidden agendas. And it also could exacerbate, in one way or another, COVID. So we jump to the moon, and the moon is the ruler of the 10th house. And again, it also represents the president. So there's a desire for balance and equality that permeates the emotional nature of the United States and the country as a whole. The moon is in Libra in the first house. We meet the world with our moon. We meet the world with that sense of equality and that sense of balance. But there is a round robin kind of mutual reception between Venus and the luminaries, which is interesting because the sun is in the moon sign and the moon is in Venus's sign and Venus is in the sun sign, which blends all of these archetypes together. Crises persist from the inability to achieve a universal racial equality. And crises develop when authority is exercised at the expense of the public good. And we have a wounded history that's carried forward in foreign affairs. I see that Saturn, Mars on the ascendant. We think we're the world's police force. Mars really wants to, correct everything and clean up what it thinks is wrong. And then there's Saturn coming along and needing to be the authority. It's why we're the world's police force. So, as I said, it's the moon is the ruler of the 10th house. It is the president. But in mundane astrology, the moon refers to the country as a whole and to the people at large and to women and women's issues. So we can expect disruptive, chaotic behavior by the president and the people at large as Eris in Aries is in a full phase opposition to the moon. And Jupiter's judicial intervention as the moon transits the 9th house and separates from a partile last quarter trine to the US Libra moon. We can definitely expect that there's going to be some judicial activity. We've seen it already, and I expect to see more. There are power conflicts between the people and those in authority. It's the crisis of democracy and public insecurity, and again, judicial action as Jupiter separates from a partile last quarter square to the moon, and Pluto by transit separates from a last quarter square to the US moon as well. Presidential deception, subterfuge, and obfuscation, lack of authenticity, honesty, in a word, lawlessness. Neptune Pisces, separating from a gibbous quincunx to the moon, and Vesta, which is all about authenticity and truth, in Virgo, in the 11th house, applying to a crescent semi-square to the US moon as well. Excuse me. So where will this play out? Clearly in the president, in the White House, because that's the moon. Congress and legislative action or inaction is the 11th house, and we're seeing they can't even agree on the stimulus that everybody is hoping they're going to receive. The court system, which is the 9th house, Supreme Court, we definitely expect to see that involved. We already see the illegality in it from our Attorney General. Economic markets, Pluto's the ruler of the 2nd house. So the economic markets are definitely going to react to what happens with this election. Universities, 9th house, religious life, also 9th house, foreign affairs, 7th house, and again, public health, pandemics, Neptune, 6th house. These are the transits. These are the aspects to the moon. So Jupiter is the media, it's the post office, it's transportation, because it's the ruler of the 3rd house in this chart. So there's a strong focus on ideas and beliefs that can be forward thinking, thinking that US national beliefs are best for the whole world as well, and a sense of national superiority. Opportunities for forward-looking, broad-minded thinking and planning. Again, I mean, this works both ways. There's light and there's shadow. There's a sense of justice, meeting the world with a national self-authority, with national self-authority, it's a bad sentence, furthering of national interests and belief to the exclusion of others. Exercise of power for national purpose that can disempower democracy. This is Jupiter in Gemini, 9th, applying to a full face semi-square to Pluto. And events and circumstances that undermine and seek to redirect national beliefs. Jupiter, again, applying to a full phase opposition to Eris. Big changes in terms of our beliefs and the reaction of the courts. So in mundane astrology, Jupiter is religion and the judicial system as well. So we can expect presidential manipulation of the judicial and electoral processes. We're already seeing it. I mean, Sun in Scorpio, separating from a quincunx to Jupiter. Concerns that the judicial and legal system, again, Venus, our sense of balance, the ruler of our moon, separates from partile first quarter trine to the US Jupiter in Gemini in the 9th. And struggles between democracy and authoritarianism, unilateral exercise of government power. Saturn in Capricorn separates from a sesquisquare to Jupiter, and Pluto from a disseminating sesquisquare also to Jupiter. And unresolved patterns of illegal activity within the US Justice Department. Eris, the 7th house, separating from a partile balsamic semi-square to the US Jupiter as well. Lots of pressure on Jupiter, on our legal system. Mercury is the ruler of the 9th and 12th houses, rules as two houses, Gemini and Virgo. A gracious outward expression of idealism and magnanimity towards the world community. The partile sextile to Jupiter is possible. But there are crises generated by clandestine national policies, black ops. We're all familiar with it. I mean, so much goes on, behind the curtains that we don't know about. Very little of it's really revealed. A lot of backroom deals, even in Congress. World projection as the messenger of peace and goodwill. I mean, that's how we project ourselves, but it's not often, what we fulfill. So it's how we appear. So the 9th and 12th houses rule the court system, the universities, and religious institutions. The 12th house is secret enemies, spies, criminals, hidden agendas, prisons, and hospitals. And in mundane astrology, Mercury refers to the media and the post office and youth. And, again, it's pretty clear that we have seen, a lot of pressure on all three of these areas. The impact of COVID on schools and churches, Hygeia, by transit separating from a conjunction to Mercury, and Chiron, retrograde, by transit applying to a less quarter trine to Mercury. And the pressures and hopes and dreams regarding the efficacy of our court system, the pressures on the US Post Office, and erratic fluctuations in the economic markets. This is Uranus and Taurus applying to a less quarter square to Mercury. Uranus is the great disruptor and interrupter. It does that in order to shatter, what's become crystallized. And clearly, we have a lot of crystallization that's gone on. And this is really the biggest thing that's happening to us is the shattering, and then really realizing which pieces we need to pick up and which we need to leave lying on the ground. There are two eclipses that are going to occur between the election and the date of the inauguration. The US Pluto return and the US Neptune return are going to be active in both of these eclipses. And you can see these intense transits to the US chart from these eclipses. We have we can expect presidential misconduct. The Gemini moon by transit separates from the quincunx to Eris. And foreign action or interference as Aries by transit conjoins Chiron in the 7th house, and public outrage as Mars by transit applies to an opposition to the moon. Eris applies to a full phase opposition to the moon as well, and Pluto by transit separates from a last quarter square to the moon. All this pressure on the moon, on the people, on the presidency. The Neptune opposition is active. The Pluto return is active. It's a quite intense chart. You can see that the moon is right on Jupiter and Uranus in the chart at the eclipse. And then 2 weeks later, we have the Sagittarius solar eclipse. And again, as I said, we have the two major US events, the Pluto return and the Neptune opposition. We're going to see militancy in the White House and an angry population. Mars, again, it's a partile opposition to the moon. These are basically some of the same aspects at both of these eclipses. Unfounded news reporting, deceptive official announcements, and open deception by the White House. We're dealing with an individual whose lawlessness is beyond belief from those of us who are witnessing it. We're seeing people who are able to carry out acts of such, lawlessness, do things that we wouldn't even think of. That's why we get blindsided. It's why we get slapped upside the head, because they're just in a place that we can't even imagine. So just for reference, these are all the major transits to the US chart over the next year or so. You'll have all these as reference. You can watch these dates as they unfold. Saturn's going to conjoin Pluto. Uranus will square Mercury. Saturn will conjunct Pluto actually twice. Squares to the moon, the eclipses, oppositions to Mercury. All very, very intense, all laid out here. So, is this the coming new age of enlightenment? The American political system, conceived as it was during the age of reason and enlightenment, was the first working model of what was considered to be representative government, in which power was shared equally between the government and the governed. Though our founding fathers had the right idea, the fragile political experiment that created seems to be flawed from the outset. The political and social issues that we are facing today stem from the fact that the concept of one man, one vote was never achieved. In fact, the vote was denied for almost 2 centuries to women and people of color. These issues are compounded by the fact that though the forerunner of the US Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, so forcefully stated that it was, quote, self-evident that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The legal endorsements of the US Constitution, ratified a decade later, focused on the rights of property and failed to address the rights of the individual. It has taken almost 250 years of emotionally fought legal battles to accomplish what appears to have been the original intent of the colonial framers of independence. What we are now recognizing in our time is that the Civil War is not over and that slavery never ended. The planetary influences driven by Pluto, Eris, and the other outer planets that are currently reflecting the spread of lawlessness and lies, political unrest, public distrust and fear and anger are not going to subside with this election. The great conjunctions of 2020 will begin to recede into the past. However, they will continue to unfold their influences for decades to come. Pluto will square Eris 3 more times, once more in 2020 at the Sagittarius eclipse, and twice more in 2021. The eclipses that will occur between the election and the inauguration suggest that the American political system is about to undergo pressures that the founding fathers did not foresee. My sense is that no matter who wins, there's going to be an angry and violent backlash. We have always assumed that revolution would come from the left. It is the right that has the guns. Native American prophecy describes the emergence and destruction of 3 worlds before ours. The Hopis say that this time, this as the 4th world is ending, the 5th world described as the return to the golden age that characterized the onset of humanity is emerging. Biblical prophecy describes events of a much more cataclysmic nature. Perhaps this is not about politics as much as it is still about enlightenment and the evolution of man. Perhaps it's time to consider that in some way we might be pushing back against prophecy. This is how you can reach me. I do monthly transits and horoscopes on my website. I do daily transits on Facebook. And if you'd like to know more about how you are personally impacted by these planetary events, please feel free to contact me for a consultation. This is how you can reach me. And I thank you all for being here, and I'd be very pleased to open the floor for comments or questions.
I'd like to comment. I think
Please.
it was a great presentation, and I really appreciate your graphics, like with such complex content. I just really appreciated the way it was laid out and easy to understand. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I guess a question would be, like, what do we do about all this? Like, is there like something you see in the chart that unlocks a pathway?
I think the pathway is to recognize that we're moving through a very liminal evolutionary space, like I said, and each of us has to make ourselves as strong as we can, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. That's the way we're going to get through this. There's no going back. We're not going to have that normalcy again, Juliet. There's going to be a new normalcy, but you know, the future is a moving target. The future shimmers. That the north node in our charts, in the U.S. chart for the world, you know, any north node that you look at, lunar north node that you look at, is a moving target. It's a probable reality, and the reality that will manifest is the one that is focused with conscious intention, with purpose and what's the word I'm looking for? With intention. We have to carry this forward. We're being moved emotionally, and we're being, you know, it's like we're being manipulated, and we have to, you know, stand our ground individually and decide, you know, what's right, what's the truth, and what we really need to do for ourselves and our family. And if each of us does that, then collectively we're all going to, you know, go forward in the right way. but you know, we're going to pass through some narrows. It's, you know, it's on one side is, you know, something out of the Odyssey. On one side is you know, Scylla, which is the whirlpool, which will suck us down. And the other side is Charybdis actually was the whirlpool, and Scylla was the multi-headed dragon, you know, that ate people, ate anybody who moved through it alive. We just have to, you know, stay strong. It's all we can do. We can't go back. We have to go forward.
Daniel,
day to day.
We have a question from Donna. Any prediction
Yeah.
on who becomes president?
I don't think astrology is best served by, you know, as a predictive science. It almost doesn't matter, Donna. I mean, it does matter. I take that back. It matters, you know, that we vote for, you know, we vote our heart, vote our conscience. But I'm concerned that either way, we're going to have turmoil because there is just so much outrage and so much polarization and so much anxiety, and that it's not going to go down smoothly either way. So I'm hoping that, you know, as we all are, that we're going to, you know, get our democracy back. But it's hard to predict, because the question is, you know, what will happen if himself loses? You know, what are going to be the consequences of that? That's
Not
what we
gonna
don't
like
know.
that.
Right. That's what we don't know.
Yeah, he doesn't. I don't think he'll like that very much.
Right. Right. You know, a wounded animal is much more dangerous than one who is not wounded.
Thank you, Daniel, so much for what you've researched so much. I really appreciate your delivery. I actually thought the Pluto return was going to be 2022, but it's already happening.
Well, that's
Really?
the Sibley chart. Any of the charts for 1776 will move everything ahead 1 year,
Right.
because it's about a degree or 2 degree difference.
Right.
But look around. If this is not it, what are you expecting?
Yeah, really. It's like, oh, can we handle much more?
Right, exactly.
But the
And
only way through, as you say, and I'm really grateful for you to say it, is the connection to the heart, and to just envision what we do want.
Exactly.
While this madness occurs. We have to
universe-
hold on here.
The universe is interactive. It responds to our intentions.
Yeah, yeah. We've got to remember the quantum field, and we came here to create something new, and we're just watching the old die.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I go with the Hopis. The Hopis say that this time the fifth world will emerge, even as the fourth world goes away. Right? That's what I hold on to.
Yeah, me too. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments and questions.
Daniel, one last question. The US has Neptune in Virgo, in the sign Virgo. Could you
Yes.
please comment on the health of the nation, that the personal health of each individual? And like, you know, there's a lot of anxiety and polarization, and, you know, I mean, I'm very sensitive to these energies. Any advice to people?
Yeah, you know, from my perspective, our health has been under attack for quite some time, Linda. You know, the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the food that we eat, genetically modified foods, the 5G, all of this stuff has impacted our immune systems. And now along comes COVID. You know, there's so much about COVID, and again, I don't want to take sides. I wear a mask. I will not go out without a mask. I mean, I ride my bike without a mask. I'm going to admit that. But we need to pay attention. Wherever we think COVID came from, whatever we think the conspiracy theories are irrelevant. In a lot of ways, you know, I find similarities to 9/11 for our country. This is that kind of event, and you know, whether this was man-made or not doesn't matter, because the disease is real. Okay, And all this discussion about, oh, people, you know, the CDC has changed the numbers. And, you know, from the beginning, we have known that COVID itself was not the killer, that COVID, that it was people who were already, their health was compromised, that are vulnerable. And that's what has been happening. It's really thick. I mean, there's so many layers of this. But we have to, you know, recognize that it's our own responsibility. If we're not doing well health-wise, it's because we have not taken care of ourselves. We live in a fix-me society that, you know, if we get sick, we go to the doctor. If we get a toothache, we go to the dentist. If we're emotionally, not well, we go for therapy. But it's about self-care. It's about taking responsibility. It's Saturn. Saturn in Capricorn is about self-responsibility. And we have to take, you know, make better choices in the supermarket, make better choices in the restaurant, make better choices, you know, every day. Are we exercising, or are we taking care of ourselves? Do we care about our bodies at all? Are we just, you know, worrying about our minds and our not even our emotional bodies? We have to take care of all four bodies. Okay. We have to be healthy in every way. And that starts with us. We can't wait for somebody to come fix us. Nobody's coming to save us. The Hopis told us this back in 2001. Nobody's coming to save us. We have to save ourselves. So, you know, that's the way that this is going to go.
Thanks, Daniel. That's a great answer. Thank you. We do have a final question from Della. Go ahead.
Yeah, my question, you know, I hear what you're saying and I agree. And then I also, like, I want to believe that there's like something that says to take action. I mean, like, people in certain cities are like, the violence is building in their cities with the police. And like you were talking about, like, all the delusions and like the narrative and how it's being spun. And so I just feel like there must be a way for also people to be engaged.
The way to do this is for everybody to vote.
Eating healthy and making decisions at the grocery store, you know? So
yeah, make sure that you vote. Okay. Yeah, let's not repeat 2016 where, you know, people said, well, I don't like Carr and I don't like him, so I'm just going to stay home. We have to get out and vote. Okay. And then we have to make sure that the vote is substantiated. We have to exercise our democracy. Democracy is an active verb.
Okay, Daniel, thank you so much. That brings us to the end of your meeting. Would you all please unmute and thank Daniel Fiverson?
Thank you, Daniel. It was a great talk.
Thank you, Daniel. Really marvelous.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here.